Hello, and welcome to this session about VM clusters with SUSE Manager. This session will explain how SUSE Manager can create clusters for virtual machines and how it makes it easy to manage virtual machines on such clusters. Here's our agenda. First, we'll discover all the building blocks to create such a solution, namely SUSE Linux Enterprise Server virtualization features, the high availability extension, and SUSE Manager virtualization add-on. And next, we will assemble all these pieces together using SUSE Manager, how to build the cluster and how to manage the virtual machines in the cluster. And then I will provide you a link to a demo showing all these. First, a few words about me. I am Cédric Bosdona, Senior Software Engineer at SUSE. I first worked for LibreOffice, and for 7 years or so, I'm in the virtualization team working on virtualization tools, libvirt initially, and now more Salt and SUSE Manager to improve the virtualization features in them. Now, let's discover the building blocks of our solution. Once at a SUSECON in the tech showcase, a customer asked me if there was a virtualization product for from SUSE. The answer is clearly no. There is no product as such. However, all the virtualization pieces are shipped within SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, which means that there is nothing to add to it. Let's go through all these blocks together. First, SLES ships two hypervisors, KVM and Zen, so that you can choose which one you want to use. This is the software that is actually running the virtual machine. Then you have libvirt, which is an API to manage virtual machines on the cluster, on the hypervisor, with the same API, whatever the hypervisor is. And this is used by several tools, some of which you surely know. The command line tool coming from libvirt, that is called virsh, and the virtual manager, which is a desktop application managing virtual machines. But Salt also comes in with the virtualization module and states that calls in libvirt. And we'll see later on how this is used by SUSE Manager in our solution. Next block, the SUSE Linux Enterprise High Availability extension. This extension ships all the tools to create clusters based on SUSE Linux Enterprise Server nodes. The software that is used for the cluster is Pacemaker and CoroSync, mostly. And it also ships tools like the web UI named Hawk, just like in the screenshot here, and a command line tool called CRM. On a cluster, you can define applications, IP addresses, file systems, and also virtual machines, which is what we want to look into more details now. So there is a virtual domain primitive to define virtual machine resources within the cluster. What does it do? It takes a libvirt XML definition. Here, the path is located in srv clusterfs vm1.xml. It also needs the disk images ready for the VM. And then it will just call libvirt to start, stop, or migrate the VM. And All these primitives will be used later, as we'll see, by the cluster by SUSE Manager to define the cluster, to define the VM in the cluster. Now the SUSE Manager virtualization add-on. This is the final brick here. It has been introduced in SUSE Manager 4.0 and has gained new features regularly since then. And in 4.1, we currently have a formula to set up the virtualization host, install the hypervisor, the tool packages, set up the default storage pool, default network, and so on. And then there's a UI to create, edit, start, stop, resume, pause, delete virtual machines. There's also the same thing for storage pools. For virtual networks, however, the management is simpler so far because there's no create and edit action yet. These will be introduced in 4.2. You also have a web graphical console to allow connecting to the virtual machine using SPICE or VNC directly in the browser. The virtualization add-on doesn't make any choice. It doesn't force you to any of the hypervisors. You can choose either Xen or KVM. And behind the HUD, it is using solstates to do everything, which means that you can write your own solstates to automate virtualization management. So you can automate your VMs management using your own solstates. Now, let's assemble them together with SUSE Manager. First, why do we want to do this? The most important use case is customers that is running VMware and wants to get rid of it, but just uses simple features. Of course, the solution will not match a full-blown vCenter. But to start-stop virtual machines, live migrate them to other nodes, this would be working. The strong points of this solution is that you can choose either Xen or KVM still. You can still have virtual machine performance tuning, even though it's not in the SUSE Manager UI yet. It's all installed. And you can, of course, easily automate all of that using Salt. How does the cluster look like? The cluster is composed of a set of hardware machines, ideally all of the same hardware. On these machines is installed SUSE Linux Enterprise Server with the HA extension. SUSE Manager will create a cluster on all these nodes and will manage all these nodes. In order to be able to run virtual machines on this cluster, we need a shared storage. The shared storage is usually a SAN or an iSCSI server or something like that. It is needed for the virtual machine disks, so that the disk is in one place, one common place for all the hypervisors. You also need a shared storage for the virtual machine definitions, but this one doesn't need important input-outputs capabilities. Just simple one, just like an NFS mount could be working as well. In the demo, you will see that the VM definitions are put exactly next to the disks. In an OCFS2, it just works as well. Why I said that you need to have hardware that is identical on all nodes as much as possible. Just because the virtual machine instance is still highly coupled to the hardware it is running on. So if you have different CPU capabilities on all the nodes, it will make it harder to live migrate a VM from one node to the other. How do we build such a cluster with SUSE Manager? SUSE Manager has a feature that is called formulas. This is a UI wrapper around sort formulas. So it's basically parameterizable source states. And here we select 3 of them that are already provided by SUSE Manager. So the virtualization host formula will set up the virtualization host, install hypervisor, tools, and everything. The next one, the Prometheus exporters, is not strictly needed for the cluster to build the cluster. However, it is pretty useful to be able to monitor the nodes using a Grafana. And then the clusters formula will be the one setting up the cluster completely. Exactly how this is configured and how this works will be detailed in the demo. How to manage a virtual machines in the cluster. This is what makes it all work together, what makes it look as a solution. From the user interface, from the look of it, there is not much that is changing from a cluster to creating virtual machines on regular hypervisors. What is changing is that in the creating VM dialog, when it is on one node of a cluster, there is a checkbox that is pre-checked to define the virtual machine on the cluster. All the rest is the usual dialog. It's just the same thing. And then there is also a path to the VM definitions, the shared folder for the VM definitions. So here, as seen in the screenshot, I've put srv clusterfs, which is the usual path for OCFS2. But this can be also a path to an NFS. It just needs to be the same path on all the nodes. What changes actually is what is in the source states. Because the source state will create a virtual machine and will also define it on the cluster. So next, all the other actions will directly go through the cluster, not directly to libvirt. So start, stop will be done, managed by CRM. Delete will also talk to CRM to delete the machine on the cluster. But it will also delete the machine on the hypervisor as well. What is a difference in the UI for virtual machines that are managed by a cluster is that there is a migration action. This action will allow you to live migrate one of the VMs from one hypervisor node of the cluster to another. All of these will be shown in a demo. So, like I said, the demo here will not be shown in this exact session, but this is exactly the same demo that you will find in the tech showcase. So you go up there, look for demo 1154 entitled Deploy and Use VM Clusters using SUSE Manager, and this is the demo you want to look for. Thank you for attending. And if you have any questions or want to discuss this solution and talk with me, I will be available in the networking area of the SUSECON website. Bye-bye, and thank you again.